Welcome, everyone. Here. So we're very excited to have Kevin Baker with us to talk about his new book, The New York Game. Kevin Baker is the best-selling author of the novels Dreamland, Paradise Alley, Strivers Row, and Sometimes You See It Coming. He wrote the monthly In the News column for the American Heritage magazine from 1998 to 2007. And his work has been published in the New York Times, the New Republic, Politico.com, New York Magazine, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, among other publications. And as you probably all know, he lives in New York City. Ken Burns, filmmaker, said of the new book, The New York Game, "No one knows New York City better than Kevin Baker, so it's only natural that he would breathe such spectacular life into the stories of the national pastime in the capital of baseball. A remarkable, complicated doubleheader of a book." And in a starred review, Booklist said, "A spellbinding history of a game and the city where it found itself." And without further ado, please welcome Kevin Baker.
Thank you so much for that. Try not to wreck the place starting out. Sorry to bring you all inside on such a great evening, but I'll do a little presentation. Yeah, can we get the lights going off help or no?
I don't think we can turn them off,
Slide it.
unfortunately.
Yeah, what do you? Yeah.
Why can't you turn them on?
It turns off like the whole upstairs.
Oh,
So that was not working for shoppers up here.
Yeah.
almost, just a little
Yeah.
more
A little more forward.
forward of the lights.
Yeah, that's
that better?
Better?
Much better.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much here for coming out. Thanks for having me at RJ and Julia. Got it. Always a few glitches. We'll see how this works, but all right. Time for me to do my Chuck Schumer here.
It's not Sunday.
It was always a city game, baseball. For all the efforts to slap a pastoral gloss on the sport, for all the attempts to make it about little boys playing in a cow pasture, only someone unfamiliar with the isolation of American farm life could truly believe that baseball came of age in the country. One of the countless names of the game gives it away. It was called town ball because it was played on those days when everybody came into town for church or market, town being the only place where enough men or boys or women or girls could be assembled for a full nine. What we think of as baseball today is really an urban game. More precisely, it is the New York game. That's what modern baseball was first called and where it was first played. New York is where its rules were perfected and where we first kept score. New York was where the curveball was devised and the bunt and the stolen base and where the home run came into its own. New York was where admission was first charged to see a game and where the very first All-Star game was played and the first World Championship. Between Manhattan and Brooklyn, of course. It was in New York, too, where the game's color line was finally broken and the reserve clause was made law, and where a players' league was conceived and died, and where the first modern free agent was signed. It was here that the sports, or any sports, first true superstar emerged, and where the first true baseball stadiums were built. New York was where sports writing reached its zenith, where the first great radio broadcasters plied their trade, and where the first game was televised. It was in New York that the only perfect game in World Series history was pitched, where an expansion team won a World Series for the first time, where 14 World Series were played exclusively within what would become the city limits, 15 if you count the 19th century, and where the World Series was fixed by gamblers, right up in the Ansonia on the Upper West Side. True story. It was where the Yankee Clipper came to play, and the Say Hey Kid, and where the chairman of the board already he recited. Baseball is a game that grew up inextricably linked to the pace and the customs and the demands of New York. It was shaped by the challenges and the possibilities the city had to offer, by its inventiveness and its ambitions, its grandiosity, and its corruption. For the last 2 centuries, the game's trajectory has followed the city's many rises and declines, its booms and its busts, its follies and its tragedies. The history of baseball, that is to say, the received history, is alive from beginning to end, from its creation myth to its rosy models of commerce, community, and fair play. John Thornton tells us in Baseball in the Garden of Eden. The lie begins with where and how it was founded. It is not my intention here to enter the eternal debate over exactly when and where the very first contest involving a bat and a ball took place. Claimants range from Prague to Pittsfield and just about every burg in between. As David Block makes clear in Baseball Before We Knew It, mankind was probably playing some sort of bat and ball game from the moment we climbed down from the trees and onto the savannah, which we recognized was a good playing field once somebody cut the grass. Ancient hieroglyphics depict Egyptians with bats playing, ancient murals depict Egyptians with bats playing at something called Seker Hamat around 2500 BC. Berbers in the 1930s were observed playing Takhert El Mahag, or the ball of the pilgrim's mother. The game, one historian theorized, was brought to North Africa in the 5th century AD by the Vandals, who were credited as well with inventing the ancient Northern European game of long ball. Medieval Normans played Grand Tek, while their French cousins played La Balle and Poissonnet. The Germans had Schlagball, and the Finns played Pesapalo. Don't ask. Countless other bat and ball games evolved under any number of different rules and different names in England. There was hand in and hand out, and wicket and cricket and rounders. There was prisoner's base, or just base. There was tip cat and one old cat. There was feeder and squares and northern spell. There was stool ball and stop ball, or stow ball, and trap ball and tut ball. There was goal ball, barn ball, sting ball, stoke ball, stick ball, and burn ball, and round ball, and town ball, and finally baseball. The whole welter of English and continental games followed the colonists over to America. Hired Polish laborers were playing the aforementioned long ball in the Jamestown settlement by 1609. On Christmas Day, 1621, Governor William Bradford of Plymouth Colony was enraged to find some of his fellow pilgrims frolicking in ye street at play openly, some at pitching ye bar, some at stool ball, and such like sport. At Valley Forge, George Washington was reported as having taken part in a game of wicket. That's him trying to block the plate with his horse, which was legal then. While Lewis and Clark tried to teach a form of base to the Nez Perce, and small boys wrote later of watching a grown Abe Lincoln join in their games of town ball. How long were his strides, and how his coattails stuck out behind, and how he tried to hit him with the ball as he ran the bases. He entered into the spirit of play as completely as any of us, and we invariably hailed his coming with delight. The one thing that is clear is that Abner Doubleday had nothing to do with it. This was widely acknowledged even at the time the myth was first propagated by a special baseball commission handpicked by Albert Spalding of Sporting Goods fame in 1905. Doubleday was sort of the Forrest Gump of the 19th century, a soldier, mystic, and bibliophile with an uncanny ability for being on hand when anything of interest was going on. The first shot of the Civil War, a Confederate cannon blast at Fort Sumter, penetrated the masonry and burst very near my head, he later recalled. And in turn, he aimed the first gun on our side in reply to the attack. He would rise to the rank of Major General, sustain 2 serious wounds, hold the Union line on the first day of Gettysburg and take the train with President Lincoln back to the battlefield a few months later when the president gave the Gettysburg Address. He read Sanskrit, corresponded with Ralph Waldo Emerson, commanded an all-black regiment of troops, attended seances at the White House with Mary Todd Lincoln. This is not an actual depiction, incidentally, just recreation, just in case you were wondering. Obtained the first charter for San Francisco's cable cars and served as president of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society. But he did not invent baseball. Nobody really thought he did, even on Spalding's commission. The commission's chairman, A.G. Mills, had been friends with Doubleday for 20 years, including a period when Mills was president of the National League. A fellow Civil War officer, Mills had arranged Doubleday's funeral and his burial at Arlington Cemetery, yet for as long and as well as he knew him, Mills admitted he never heard his friend so much as mention baseball. You know that thing you're president of? I invented it. Never took place. In a brief autobiographical sketch, Doubleday himself wrote that in my outdoor sports, I was addicted to, wait for it, topographical work. Apparently, Doubleday's anointing as the inventor of baseball had much more to do with the fact that Spalding and his wife were also theosophists. If true, it's hilarious. It's as if a group of Scientologists hatched a plot to have L. Ron Hubbard replace Dr. Naismith as the inventor of baseball. Of basketball. Confronted by reporters years later, Mills comforted that at least his commission had picked the perfect small town. Once again, saving baseball from the clutches of the big, dirty, corrupting, multi-ethnic city. I submit to you, gentlemen, that if our search had been for a typical American village, a village that could best stand as a counterpart of all villages where baseball might have been originated and developed, Cooperstown would best fit the bill. And so it would, though with all the great stars and the makers and shakers of the game that it honors, not even the charming baseball Hall of Fame that would arise in that charming American village has ever had the temerity to admit Abner Doubleday. By the 1950s, an alternative foundation myth was set up in Doubleday's place. That is how the game was invented by the New York Knickerbockers Baseball Club, depicted here, looking like a bunch of Mennonites out on a toot. One fine day in 1846, they took the steam ferry over to the Elysian Fields in Hoboken to play the mysterious New York Baseball Club in the very first game of real baseball and lost 23-1. I first read that when I was 8 years old, and I didn't believe it then. The giveaway is that thumping defeat. If the Knickerbockers invented the damn game, how did they manage to lose the first one so badly? If you want the answer, well, read the book. First, a word about that picture of George Washington blocking the plate. The game he actually played at Valley Forge was called Country Wicket or Wicket Ball, and it was the Connecticut game, the Nutmeg State's contribution to early baseball. There are accounts of wicket dating back to 1725, and it was played throughout New England and out to the Midwest and even reached down into Brooklyn. It was said in Bristol that men and boys take to wicket playing as a duck will to water. Yet by the end of the Civil War, it was in clear decline, being surpassed like everything else by the New York game. Why was that? Well, one reason might have been that Connecticut wicket was played with as many as 30 people to a side, which required quite a crowd. Maybe it was the game itself. Wicket's leading historian, George Dudley Seymour, claimed that if the degree of excitement is in direct proportion to the number of heroes engaged, a game of wicket should arouse a community to a higher pitch of enthusiasm than baseball, but conceded, on the other hand, wicket is a less interesting game to watch. While baseball was then considered a very fast sport, believe it or not, it often took all day to play a 3-inning match of wicket. In one 1848 contest, Litchfield defeated Walcottville by the score of 232 to 150. And that was a pitching duel. Store clerks in Hartford did try to play a shortened game in the 1850s, in which the first clerk up would dress and go around State House Square at 5 o'clock in the morning, knocking on doors and calling out, "Wicket!" That way they could get in the whole game before the stores opened at 7. This, however, resulted in a large number of homicides, so it had to be done. Perhaps it was the playing field, or maybe it was the equipment. The wicket ball was supposed to be no larger than 4.5 inches in diameter, although at least one was described as being as large as a man's head and of peculiar manufacture. Its center was a cube of lead weighing about 1.5 pounds.
Oh, God.
About this were tightly wound rubber bands and the hole sewed in a thick leather covering. The wicket bat seen here was said to be, among other things, to bear a strong resemblance to a Fiji war club. You be the judge. About the only thing that remains of the Connecticut baseball and real baseball today is the pitcher's path between home plate and the mound, which would play a key role in a bitter New York disaster on the diamond many years later. Connecticut, though, has produced 208 major league players at last count, right down to Mo Vaughn of Norwalk and Bobby Valentine of Stamford, seen here in his disguise. In this book, a couple more who were mentioned early on include Roger Connor of Waterbury, the great Hall of Fame first baseman for the champion New York Giants teams of the 1880s, and Ned Hanlon of Montville, a center fielder, but above all, the manager of the Brooklyn Superbas and the father of all managers, continuing right to this day. Yet the Connecticut native who is really the most significant figure in Major League Baseball has to be George Weiss, seen on the left here, the son of German immigrants to New Haven, and the man who, as much as any other, built the New York Yankees to become the juggernaut they became. Weiss had to leave Yale after a year to work in the family grocery after his father died. Before he was out of his 20s, though, he had gained control of a succession of New Haven minor league teams called the Weissmen, get it? The Profs, inevitable, and the Max Feds, don't ask. On the 20th Century limited to attend baseball's winter meetings with his manager, Wild Bill Donovan, Weiss let the older Donovan have the lower bunk in their Pullman car, thus narrowly avoiding death himself when the train was in an awful crash, which killed Donovan and 8 others. Weiss was rarely so generous. As an executive with the Yankees, he was always efficient and often brilliant, yet he was also known for being taciturn, miserly, and like all too many in the game at the time, an inveterate racist. After 29 years with the club, he was abruptly fired after the 1960 pennant-winning season and went home to his wife, the vivacious Hazel Wood Weiss, who was a skilled aviatrix and artist. "I married George for better or for worse," Hazel was heard to say when this occurred, "but not for lunch." Soon thereafter, George Weiss was back in baseball, helping to build and develop the new New York Mets franchise. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, criticisms? No criticisms, but other than that, okay. Yeah.
What was the most unusual thing you came across in doing the research for the book?
Oh, gosh, it's hard to say. I think just finding out how the Massachusetts game was played, which some people, such as John Thorne, feels should be baseball today. But it sounds like absolute lunacy. You could hit the ball behind you. There was no separation of fair and foul territory. You could run to the base any way you wanted to, and you're made out only by somebody hitting you with a thrown ball, which was rubber in those days. So it was less painful, but it sounds like a Looney Tunes cartoon come to life, and it must have been great fun. How you put a stadium around that, I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When it started, you said 30 positions, and when did it get to 9 positions?
Oh, well,
What did that
30
involve?
guys playing in the
Right,
wicket.
yeah.
Yeah, again, the New York game got this down to 9 guys. And one of the guy who probably should be considered the founder, if anybody should, was Doc Adams, who was one of those Knickerbockers you saw there. The Knickerbockers were not the first team, but they wrote everything down and kind of codified it into the New York game. And he was the first shortstop. He got tired of running out to left field to take these relays with this rubber ball. So he is the first guy who went to what he just called a Scotch saddler and had him sew up a leather ball, almost like a hard ball. And that changed the whole nature of the game too. You know, it injected an element of danger, even of death in the game. And the one man killed on a Major League Baseball field would be killed in the Polo Grounds. Yeah. Ray Chapman, shortstop for the Cleveland Indians, who was hit by a pitch ball before they had helmets. Yeah. Baseball, always being on top of things and progressive as it is, waited another 20 years basically to insist that everybody wear helmets. But that was that kind of changed the nature of the whole thing. It was much faster, much more a game for men, for really good athletes.
You're talking about the evolution of the ball itself.
Oh, that's the start of the evolution of it. And the New York game kept making these adjustments, getting down to this, 9 guys, 9 innings, 3 outs, 90 feet between the bases, 60 feet. This whole kind of concatenation of 3s and 9s that somehow became baseball and worked. And this is mostly through trial and error and making the ball harder and a certain size. Really, so by the 1890s or so, it was pretty much like the ball we know today. Yeah. So
How do you see it going in the future? With keeping a starting pitcher in now, they're talking about 6 innings, pitch clock, speed of the game. I mean, how fast can they make it?
I think some of those things were necessary because the way the game was slowing down, but I wish they had done it organically instead of through rules. I wish they would teach people to, for instance, pitch to contact. I wish you had not had things like the rules on the shifts. I hate the idea of the what's called the Manfred man. As some of us of a certain age know, people who are put, the guys put on second base to start the inning. I think replays slow the game down too much. Have the umpires or not, but don't have them, everything being challenged.
Yeah.
I think all of that is a bad idea. The pitcher particularly is the hero of the game. And it used to be in the dead ball era when the ball was not so much made differently, but you never replaced it. So you were playing like in a summer evening with this, and you could spit on it. You can put anything you wanted on it. They didn't, if a ball got hit in the stands, the ushers retrieved it, so you had this mess that was falling apart. So pitchers constantly pitched 9-inning games, where they were the big starting pitchers like Christy Mathewson, who was the first real superstar in the game. And then, that changed somewhat. And then you had the closer who would come in usually to music and, and he'd finish off the game. And that was dramatic. And you had people like Mariano Rivera who were amazing to watch. But now it's like, it's shorter and shorter. Nobody goes more than 5 innings. The pitcher's the guy who initiates every play. The pitcher's the guy who's on the line for getting a win or a loss or a blown save or save. To diminish his role, I think is a huge mistake and will really hurt the game.
As a kid, I remember Warren Spahn.
Yeah.
And he just pitched and pitched.
There was some game,
Yeah.
an extra inning game in the 60s where he and Juan Marichal threw like some insane, like 263 pitches.
Yeah, and they
between
kept
them or
going.
something. It was just nuts.
First Met game I ever went to.
Yes.
It was a 16-inning game.
Yes.
Al Jackson, I believe, pitched the first 14.
Oh, yeah.
Throwing over 200 pitches.
Yeah.
I mean, we forget a lot of pitchers did. You look at some of these guys in the past, a lot of them did blow their arms out early. So, I mean, that's not a myth, But there should be, you taught guys to pitch to contact so they could last longer in the game. So you had them out there more. I think baseball needs to get back to the organic. You pitch fast because that kept your fielders alert. Baseball needs to get back to those things. You hit differently when you had two strikes on you. You didn't swing for the fences on every pitch. I think I wish it would do that, but whether that will make a difference or not, I don't know. Yeah.
What's the evolution of the statistics around baseball? Whose idea was it to really come up with the idea of like, we're gonna record this stuff and what are we gonna focus on?
Yeah, it's a good point. Statistics are always a key part of baseball. Americans love statistics, and it's not hard to understand why. You came to this gigantic continent that seemed to go on forever, and you wanted to constantly kind of divide things up and measure what you had before you, and you wanted to measure business, you wanted to measure sports. For gambling, you wanted to measure stuff. A guy named Henry Chadwick was an English immigrant, was kind of known as the father of baseball. Also, he came up with the box score, which is a wonderful invention. We would say he kind of mismeasured the game now. He thought home runs were not any good because they took too much out of a player. Felt it's better to hit a single out of singles. And a lot of morality imposed on the game, as there always is in our games. But that's where it started, and they kind of evolved. And you had this whole revolution in statistics, 20, 25 years ago, which really gave us a better measure of the game. But like some of us would say, it's probably gone too far now. So it's a good part of it's a constant debate about the game. It's a great part of its history.
I think there's too many statistics.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Were there other professional teams besides the Dodgers and the Yankees, and how did it whittle down to the two of those taking over?
Oh, sure. Initially,
In
There
New
was-
York.
there was the National Association, first professional league. Weirdly, could be wrong about this, but from what I could find, it's the first league anywhere by anybody, anytime. Before it predates division soccer in Europe. It's before any college leagues, any high school leagues. This was the first league. And there were problems, because the league is in a way another name for a cartel, which baseball quickly became. But it had, there were the New York Mutuals, who were Boss Tweed's team, and to nobody's great surprise, were soon found to be constantly throwing games and doing something. There was a Brooklyn team, I think the Brooklyn Atlantic, and they went out of business. And then you had the National League, and the National League, you quickly had the New York Gothams, later the Giants, and you had the American Association, another major league, and they had the original 19th century Mets, who were owned by the same guy who owned the Giants, which was a mistake. But so he transferred all his stars to the Giants and sold the Mets to somebody who moved them out to Staten Island. So there's been Major League Ball played in every borough of New York City. We took them out to Staten Island, and the guy who owned the ferry concession then, he offered like a free game with each ferry crossing price. And it was the summer of 1886 when you got to see from the ballpark what going up in New York Harbor,
The bridge, yeah.
the Statue of Liberty
Oh, okay.
going up, none of American Association originally, they played the first quote unquote subway series against the Giants. It's before there was a subway. It's before Brooklyn is even part of New York City. But, and then with the American League, you have the Yankees coming in 1903. So that's when you get the big three who last for the next 50 years plus.
They're a highway.
54 years. Originally, they were generally called the Highlanders. They played in Washington Heights, in Hilltop Park, aka the Rock Pile. You can imagine how that very much reflected what the playing surface was like. But that's now where the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center is. But so they went and later moved in and rented space from the Giants and the Polo Grounds, and then built their own stadium. Yeah. So.
I'd be curious what you think about Ruth, who really changed baseball. And I mean, I haven't looked at this in a while, but teams are hitting 10 home runs and he hit 40 or 50. It's like a golfer like knocking it in off the tee or something. I mean, it was a totally different game. Was his vision that good? Was his strength that good? Was it the short porch in Yankees? I mean, why were there no other really strong guys in the 20s or 30s? Because his numbers were so off the charts.
He was amazing. It's true. I go into some of that. He was medically tested at some point and was found to have a slightly faster like twitch reflex, which I can't tell you what that does for an athlete. Probably something great, but
I read he could read a record spinning at 45 or 78 RPMs, whether that's folklore or not, but he could stop it and read it. His vision was that acute.
Well, no, vision does not really seem to have been better than anybody else's. We see mostly film of him in his older age,
Right.
with that huge pot belly.
Right.
So when he's younger, he looks like just an animal just racing around the bases and everything. He was, I think, the greatest athlete in baseball history in terms of being a great pitcher, who then became a great hitter. I think he was the most transformational athlete in history. Obviously, around the world, there are more people know who Muhammad Ali is, or Michael Jordan, Lionel Messi, but he really brought baseball into big time. Before he came to the Yankees, baseball made about as much money as the sheet music industry did. He comes to the Yankees, they have the first 1 million person gate for a season, and Ruth is the key to that. And he, not only gets baseball over its huge gambling scandal, but he transforms the sport, transforms everything else. He was a larger than life character. On their off days, the Yankees did not take any time off. They went and usually played in any place that would pay them a certain guarantee of money. Ruth was expected often to pitch those games, maybe pitch the whole game, sign autographs for everybody, sign the instruments of the local band, lead the band, and generally end up mobbed by children at the end of the game. One of his teammates said, "Yeah, it's all the lies about Babe Ruth are true." He was a drinker, like almost all ball players were then, not particularly excessive in baseball. The things he did, though, that I find really scary, he was known to take an entire pitcher of iced tea and chug it. Iced tea, ice cubes, and lemon slices. I don't know how a human being does that. Supposedly that's quite a character, very, very tolerant with all the kind of huge fan attention. Lived his life, and also in the Ansonia, lived his life at this kind of rapid speed. He would just eat prodigiously. Would often send a clubhouse boy out for hot dogs during the middle of the game. The Yankees foolishly forbade him in a later contract from working out in the off season, which he'd like to do. He was probably ADHD, and constant motion activity. But an amazing character, and the kind of superstar he was, he would, when the Yankees played in Philadelphia against the Athletics, they would get off at the North Station there and walk the rest of the way to Shive Park where the Athletics played. And the word would go out, Babe Ruth is coming. And adults would run to their windows and children would run out and jump on him. And he would often, wind up at the ballpark with like 4 or 5 kids just hanging off him. It's kind of like that. I mean, obviously you can't blame anybody for doing that today, but boy, I wish I had seen that. Sir.
So comparisons, because I'm a lifelong Yankee fan.
Good for you.
So I always hear,
Yeah.
oh, Ted Williams is greater.
Yeah.
Willie Mays was greater. Hank Aaron was greater. Can't compare to Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was not there, and I am always saying Babe Ruth, greatest baseball player of all time.
He was fantastic, but I think again the key is the pitching. Nobody pitched. Willie Mays apparently was a terrific pitcher. His father forbade him from pitching out of fear of blowing out his arm, at one point. Ted Williams tried a little pitching. Ted Williams was never really interested in anything but hitting. All great players. The one guy who might have been, and it's not Shohei Ohtani, the one guy who may have been in Ruth's league. But this is one of the horrible bits about segregation in baseball, among many others, was Martin Dehigo, who was this great player in the Negro Leagues. Pitched into his late 30s, pitched very well, played pretty much every position on the field, was a great hitter, made the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown and in Cuba and in Mexico. He might have been comparable, but unfortunately we won't know because the leagues weren't integrated, which was another horrible part of it. Yeah, sir.
So as the media capital of America, could you talk maybe about what was the impact of radio and TV on baseball in this period?
Yeah, good question. Radio came in, it was huge, but baseball, again, always being so forward thinking, was always very suspicious of it. They limited the number of radio broadcasts because they felt like people wouldn't come to the park then. In fact, a lot of New York teams didn't have them at all for many seasons. Really, it changes when crazy Larry McPhail comes in and running the Dodgers, and he brings Red Barber up from Florida native up to broadcast games. I think he had already been broadcasting for the Cincinnati, but and irony is like the two first beloved legendary New York broadcasters are both from the South, Mel Allen and Red Barber. And they discover, lo and behold, that this just creates more demand for baseball. People want to go out and see what they're hearing on the radio. It's baseball is always discovering stuff like that. Like night baseball starts about 20 years after it probably could have. It's nobody wants to play baseball at night. Where when people are working every hour in the day. So that was it. And same thing kind of with TV at first. And then TV comes in, but they still don't quite get it. Like Walter O'Malley, one of the things he was going to fund a stadium with was Skyatron, which was a early pay TV idea, which is a metal box you would attach to the TV and you'd put a quarter in if you wanted to watch the Dodgers on their special channel. That was his idea. What could possibly go wrong? That failed and took a lot of his money with him. But so they didn't quite get to, but TV quickly, shot their profits up into the, atmosphere there. Did you have a question? No. Oh. Well, thanks so much for coming out, and happy to sign books or anything else here, or answer more questions. So doesn't matter what allegiance you hold to what team.
We're all friends here.
I suddenly do have a question.
Okay.
What made you decide? Have you always been a baseball fan? Go to the games as a kid?
I have been a baseball fan since the age of 8. I went to games as a kid. My father took me. My father and uncle were both Giants fans. They were born in Fordham Road. The Giants were a big ethnic team, really supported by the Irish. And my father took me to see Mickey Mantle play, though, in the original Yankee Stadium. And the next week, my uncle took me to see Willie Mays play when the Giants were visiting Shea Stadium. So,
You play second base?
did I play
Did you
second?
play? Did you
Oh,
play
I
baseball?
played baseball. I usually played right field. We're the worst player on the team.
I should have asked the question.
I once in Little League, I did once throw a guy out at home plate. It was an approximately 45 bounce throw, followed by a roll that somehow went through the infield and got the guy who would hit was really a single, but was trying to stretch it to a home run. It was my sports playing highlight.
Thank you.
One more question. We're talking about Babe Ruth and all the famous names that you wrote about, is there one player from this era that you think is the most underrated player? So, like, what's a name that you think we should know that we don't know?
Good question. It's funny how people fade, you know, who were considered, my father's favorite player was Mel Ott,
Mhm.
who people just don't really remember much anymore. But he's-
every crossword puzzle.
Tremendous home run. It's like,
When I got that foot lift.
yeah, famous thing, the thing that Sadahara did, lifts the foot. You know, terrific hitter, but, you know, largely forgotten. Shame.
You know, and that's it, not, I have to say the greatest player of baseball right now, Aaron Judge. There's really
Yeah.
very little comparison, you know,
Yeah.
or Ohtani.
Yeah, it's amazing with Ohtani, with the whole pitching as well.
Yeah.
Although DH, I think Babe Ruth, if he could DH, could have DH, would still be playing today. You know, it's like that, it's a somewhat different, but he is a great player. It's interesting, it'll be interesting to see if that gambling thing emerges as a bigger problem.
I really
I hope
think, I think he got screwed.
I hope not, but we'll see. Yeah.
So, you know, we've all seen, these horrible calls that umpires are making
Yeah.
because of, you know, the
Yeah.
strike zone being out there. I think in the minor leagues, don't they use computerized calls now or
I don't-
something?
I
And is
don't-
that come?
Well,
Yeah, electronic balls and strikes,
Yeah,
which is needed.
I don't like it. I like the human element, but I think that's also a betting thing, which baseball and all sports have embraced at their peril. They don't want, nobody wants to lose a big bet on some blown call,
Look how it's helped tennis.
but you know, but I think it's inviting the devil back in the room.
I
You
think
know,
it's coming.
It almost killed baseball before. It could easily do so again, but you know, baseball seems addicted to it now.
What he probably does is like, yeah, when when someone slides into a base, you see the fielder continuing to tag him in the hope that like
Yeah.
his right.
Yeah, and he slides,
Yeah.
and I hate that. I hate that part. They show 55, you know, it just slows the game down.
You can take one more question.
Yeah.
Recently, there was the controversy of including the Negro League statistics
Yeah.
with baseball. What's the kind of, how do baseball writers feel like, there's split camps about that?
Well, I don't know, but it's good to have them in at something like Baseball Reference, you know, to go and see it. There's just, I mean, often these seasons in the place, like the Negro National League or the Eastern Colored League,
Mhm.
they'd be like 23 games.
Mhm.
So, you know, these ball players played everywhere.
Right.
Players of color would play often year round to make any kind of money. They'd play in the Caribbean, they'd play barnstorming games outside, but the seasons were so short that I think it's a little bit.
That was one of the
meaningless.
complaints was Josh Gibson, the rate stats, like slugging.
Right, he was,
Right.
you know, I mean, he was, they were undoubtedly major league equivalent or better.
Right.
You know, they regularly beat major league teams in exhibitions that were generally pretty hard played.
Yeah.
So you know, they were certainly comparable. It's nice to have the stats there to see, but they're just, you know, 23 games is not like the long season that is baseball. So, you know, stats can't tell us anything, everything, sad to say.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.